Previously on MindFlareRetro.
It's simpler if you just watch part 2 first.
Hello again, and welcome back to part 3 of the C64 Saver version 2.4 Build It From Scratch video series that seems to never end. By the end of part 2, we had a successfully assembled and tested C64 Saver printed circuit board, but now we need to find a home for it. We do have several options, like installing it as is internally right inside your C64, just like Plan C did. However, I'm going to go with the external enclosure method. BWAC designed this PCB to fit perfectly inside a Hammond 1551G enclosure, and I've always liked this translucent blue one. However, seeing as this is a first install, I'm going to use one of the plain old beige or black ones. And besides, I have something else in mind for this translucent blue one at a future date. Enter the plain yet pretty beige case. And now for the PCB fit test, it fits perfectly. In fact, it fits so perfectly, I have to figure out how we are going to get the cables through the case. As I stare at this and attempt to think ahead, it becomes very clear that I'm going to have to be very careful with cable placement and any associated drilling. Pencil. I'm going to trace a line along the inside of the case across the top of the PCB so I have an idea of how much usable height I have to work with when drilling my holes for the cables. In reality, there is not a lot of space to work with. I'm doing a lot of close-up shots here, and it's a little deceiving when watching on video how tight of a space this really is to work with. To give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, this is the cable I'm going to be using for the input and output sides. I'll bring in my digital calipers here and show you, if they zero out, that the diameter of this cable is a little wider than 5 millimeters. As I continue to tinker and visualize how this is going to work, it becomes pretty clear that there is little margin for error here. I would like to use a proper cable strain relief rather than just passing the cable through a drilled hole in the side of the enclosure. But the limited height doesn't leave a lot of options. And continuing with that line of thinking, I would like to pass the cable through the hole and extend it to where it needs to connect on the other side of the board rather than just poking the head of the cable through the hole and attaching it to the printed circuit board on a connection that's only a couple millimeters away. Something like this. I have a very old collection of strain relief types in different sizes. These ones are interesting because I think they're silicone, and these ones are new in box, Radio Shack line cord strain reliefs, hard plastic. They're intended for an AC mains cable, and I think, yeah, these are going to be way too big for this project box. Yeah, not happening. This round silicone one, however, looks like it might be the ticket. In fact, yeah, the diameter is perfect for this cable. Probably a 5mm diameter, and the cable's a little bit thicker, so it's fitting nice and snugly. We shall go with this. These little silicone grommets have a groove along their circumference, allowing them to fit securely along the width or edge of the project box. And this should allow it to secure nicely in the little project box that we're using. The grommet is literally the height of the available space to work with. Measure twice, cut once is definitely the adage to respect here. In my reasoning, the cables have to enter the box off-center in order to keep clear of the high-standing components, as well as allowing enough of the cable to be pushed through and then stripped back in order to make the proper connections. Using a sharp pencil and a sharp eye, I will attempt to mark the center area of the grommet, and that looks to be about right. And now I will do the same thing on the other side. Oh, that's a total disaster. So much for the sharp eye. Ugh. Let's try that again, shall we? That'll do. I think this is a good point to take a little break and mention that this video is sponsored by PCBWay. As PCBWay has been sponsoring my last few videos, I received a message late yesterday from my rep at PCBWay confirming that they had returned to full operation on March 9th, 2020. In appreciation for all the support they received from customers around the world, PCBWay is now giving back to its customers with a gift promotion called Stand with PCBWayers. Go to PCBWay.com now and click the Get Your Gift banner at the top of the screen. Scroll down just a little bit and click the Get Your Gift button. A gift credit will be applied instantly to your account balance. This credit amount can be applied to any order payment. I'd like to express my thanks to PCBWay for not only supporting the retro computer community, but also for giving back to their loyal customers. Drill time. Okay, I've got two bits here, 5mm, and this is a 3mm. I'm going to drill a 3mm pilot hole and then finish off with a 5mm final hole. And I think that should be right for the grommet. But, I am going to use this wood bit with the pointed end and score the hole where I'm going to drill, hopefully so that the drill bit doesn't slip. Done. And that looks like that should help. Deep breath, here we go. That is a nice clean pilot hole. And now for the other side. Pilot hole number 2 complete. And now I've increased the bit size to drill our 5mm hole. The situation has become very fluid, people. Things are changing on the fly. There is no way this grommet is going to be able to be squeezed and fit into the hole. So I need a new plan of attack, which means cutting off the top of the case above the hole and squeezing the grommet into place. Yep. I am hoping that this plastic is soft enough that I can cut through it with a good old razor knife. Are you soft enough, plastic? You are not. How about a small file? Now that is more promising. Well, not as pretty as a cleanly drilled hole, but this will have to do. Oh, for the love of... Okay, I've widened the new hole to be the diameter of the original drill hole, and hopefully I will be able to slip the grommet down and fit it into place. And part of the challenge here for a good fit is to make sure that the wall of the case is fitting inside the groove, again around the circumference of the grommet. And it looks like we have a really good fit. Yes, I'm very happy with that so far. Although I do see one potential issue. The grommet on the inside extends up above the height of the case, and the lid has this little lip seal that extends down, and I think the grommet is going to be in the way of it closing. The grommet on the outside can be forced up and over to fit properly there, but on the inside it's still pushing up against the lip of the lid and not allowing it to close tightly. So I might have to trim the grommet tight on the inside. I think that's going to be the only option. Snip, snip, a little off the top. And speaking of snip, snip, I think I've found a quicker way than using these little files to widen the hole. Ooh, quicker and cleaner. And ta-da! That turned out pretty good. Although I'm still going to have to trim those grommets. But before I do that, I want to cut these cables to an appropriate working length. I have made 2 cut markings on both lengths of the cable. One will be the total length of the cable, and the second will be where I strip off the insulation to work with the wires and make the connections. So I'm going to snip the first marking to get my length of cable to work with. Next, I will bring in one of the simplest and handiest wire strippers I've ever used. Really good for coax cable. Just clip it on, spin it a few times, and it scores the wire just enough to strip off that outside insulation, nice and cleanly without damaging the wires underneath. To be honest, having not made anything like this before, I wasn't quite sure what type of cable to choose when I placed my parts order. Obviously, it had to be a 4-conductor, and ultimately I chose a 22 AWG wire gauge, which should be more than sufficient for this project. Next step is to prepare the wires for soldering onto our PCB. Another gadget tool, the automatic wire stripper. A lot of people don't like these, but it works really well for me. How easy is that? A time saver, if you ask me. I'm just going to twist all these ends tight, and then we can tin the tips. The helping hands are helping. And now, I just need to quickly tin these ends. One down and one to go. And now it's time to connect our wires to the PCB. Remember, there's an input side and an output side to the PCB. I'm going to first solder these wires to the output side for no particular reason, just that's where I'm starting. Following wiring color convention as best I can, I'm going to be connecting the red wire to the 5-volt output and the black wire to the ground on the output side. Assuming I can fit my tinned wires through the holes. Come on, guys. What the heck? I might have to remove some of the solder from my tinning work here in order for these to fit. All fixed. I now have my 4 cable wires inserted into the correct connection holes on the PCB, and I will now solder each one into place. As useful as these helping hands are, I do have a major pet peeve when soldering things. I cannot stand it when the board wiggles around when you're trying to touch a connection, like this. Stop wiggling. I have now completed soldering the wires to both sides. I still have to do some excess wire trimming on the top portion here, and maybe add a little bit extra solder to that 9-volt AC pad, but otherwise it looks pretty good. Trimming and minor solder touch-ups is complete, and I'm happy with these connections. Now that all board soldering is complete, I want to clean this PCB. I'm going to be using my flux remover spray and give it a good bath. And there we have it, shiny clean. And it's time for a test fit. We have our little enclosure ready to go, and this is how the PCB will fit in. Looks good. Surprisingly though, the two self-tapping screws for mounting the PCB in the case are not included with the case. So I had to dig through my collection of tiny screws and find a pair. I found these little guys and they should work perfectly. And of course you need the fingers of an elf in order to get these screws in place. And if you don't have any elven friends handy, a magnetized screwdriver would help a lot too. And that little helper I do have handy. That's better. And the board is now mounted in the case. Next on the list is to deal with these grommets. We know they fit in the slot opening in the side of the case, but the height of the grommet is still a little bit too high, and as mentioned earlier, I think I need to trim these off in order for the lid to fit flush. Unfortunately, I can't make the slot opening in the side of the case any deeper, mainly because I still want the grommet to cover the opening at the top of the hole. I don't want any kind of gap and be able to see into the case. I'm literally playing with millimeters here. Anyway, I'm going to attempt some trimming of the grommet now. And of course, I failed to record the trimming process, but you can see it here and the lid fits pretty good now. Next, I want to move on to adding the two DIN connectors. I have this pair of male and female 7-pin round DIN connectors. These are inexpensive ones that I purchased off of eBay or AliExpress, but they should do the trick. Now, looking at this now, I'm wondering if I have left enough cable length in order to make all my connections in the DIN connector. Anyway, this is how it'll look when it's all done. These connectors come apart pretty easily. All you have to do is loosen the protective sheath and pull it off. And then the metal portion splits in half, and the little connection terminal just pops out. This is the female connector for the input side, and we can see we have little connection points in order to connect our 4 wires for 5 volts, ground, and 9 volts. And this is the connector pinout that we're dealing with. Even though this is a 7-pin round DIN connector, we only need to make 4 connections. Looking at the power plug connector on the right, we see that pin 5 needs to connect to the plus 5 volt DC line, and pin 2 needs to connect to ground. Similarly, pins 6 and 7 at the top are for connecting our 9 volt AC line. Knowing this, let's get connecting. To help me with the soldering here, I'm going to use my helping hands and this little ferrule connector, which I'm going to plug into one of the holes here, like so, and clip that into the helping hands, like so. At this point, it is very important to remember that we are connecting the cable to the input side of the circuit board, and the end of the cable needs to have a round female DIN connector. And just as important, before we install the connector, we need to slide on the protective shroud or cover for the connector. Don't get ahead of yourself and solder on the connector and then realize, uh-oh, I forgot to slide on the cover first. At that point, you'll be undoing all your work and starting over. This is a situation that I was worried about. I have left very little slack for me to work with, so I'm going to have to be very careful when soldering on the connector. I'm going to start with connecting the 9 volt AC wires. I've applied a little bit of flux, and I am now tinning the connections at pins 6 and 7. Well, perhaps not to NASA standards, but good enough for what I'm doing here. And remember, I selected the white and yellow wires to be the 9-volt AC connections, and I'm having difficulty getting the wire to get into position. One of my challenges here is getting this 22 gauge wire to behave and bend into the proper position for me. And the second challenge is trying to do this fiddly work with a camera in the way. Yay, did it. Skipping ahead a little bit, I have completed the 5-volt and ground connections on pins 5 and 2 respectively. Polarity is critical here, so be sure to double check that your wiring is correct. If you're like me, sometimes these round DIN wiring diagrams can be a little bit confusing as to whether you're looking at the front or the back of the connector. I've created a reference wiring diagram particular to this C64 Saver project. I will post a link to it in the description below. This is coming along pretty good so far, and now it's time to connect the metal barrel. With this particular connector design, the barrel comes in 2 pieces. And once again, seeing as I haven't left enough space to work with, I have to try to insert it underneath the outer sheath and then connect the 2 halves. Here we go. Okay, I have 1 half inserted, and I just need to align it correctly. And it should, there we go, snap into place so the orientation is correct. And now the fun part, trying to get the top half inserted, aligned, and also snapped into place. Finally, there's the snap, and everything is connected. Although not the greatest quality connector, everything is in place, and I'm going to go with it. And to finish it off, we can slide the protective sheath over the barrel. You might have to rotate it like so that the metal tab of the barrel lines up with the hole on the plastic sheath. The metal tab needs to poke up through the hole so that it locks the barrel into place. Sometimes with these cheap connectors, you have to pry up the little tab a little bit so it actually locks properly into place. And clearly that happens to be the issue here. I'll use a little screwdriver to pry that up later on, but for now, let's move on. Okay, here comes the fun part. It's time to solder the male connector, but this one's a bit more of a challenge. I have already tried to solder a wire onto one of the connections, and the first issue with these El Cheapo connectors can be seen clearly. The inferior plastic melts very quickly under the heat of the soldering iron and pushes the pin out of alignment. This is caused by yet another issue. Solder doesn't want to stick to the shiny plating on the pins, so your dwell time with the iron is too long, ultimately melting the plastic, and then again ultimately the pin slides out of position in the molten plastic. A lot of ultimately's, but you get what I'm saying. So how do we deal with this? Well, I've since learned alternate methods to do this properly, but in the meantime, enter the potato. And another compounded issue is the gauge of these wires, which is 20 AWG and are a little bit too girthy and don't want to fit into the back of these pins. I've pre-tinned these wires rather poorly, and that might actually be making things worse. I recall recently somebody asking,
And what's with the potato?
well, whoever you are, this is what's with the potato. If memory serves, I remember hearing about this trick from BWAC several years ago. I believe a friend of his used this potato method for holding round-in connectors while soldering them. The thinking here is the potato holds the connector and all the pins perfectly in alignment during soldering. If you apply too much heat while soldering and the plastic gets a little bit soft, the pins aren't going to slide around left, right, or even up and down. The potato, being a potato and almost 80% water, can withstand the heat of the iron and doesn't wick away the heat applied to the pins. So in theory, you should be able to get in and out with your iron quickly on each pin without causing too much collateral damage. And of course, another way to avoid collateral damage is to not touch the plastic with the hot soldering iron. Well done, MFR. So now back to my wire gauge issue. Again, these are 20 AWG wires and are a little bit overkill for this type of low voltage project. But that's what I'm working with, so let's see how this turns out. Having said that, my next bright idea is to peel away some of the wire so that I have just enough to fit inside the hole, and the rest I will solder to the outside of the pin. Genius. Ugh, what a frustrating pain in the ass. Yeah, so that was fun. New plan of attack, for better or worse. I have moved to using some short pieces of 22 gauge wire that I have. 22 gauge, of course, is a little bit thinner than the 20 gauge I was using. However, I still have to separate it in order to insert part of it into the center of the pin and the remainder on the outside of the pin. Still not a good method. Oh man, this is hideous. Everyone, please avert your eyes. I will, of course, tidy up this mess and hide any of my remaining shame under heat shrink. Cleaned up. Honest. Okay, finally, my little wire pigtails are attached to the plug and heat shrinked, and I also have a larger heat shrink over each one, so when I connect it to the main cable, I can heat shrink over those solder joints as well. I don't know why I keep showing close-ups of everything, but here's another one. Yuck. And here's the finished connections. How did we get here? Yeah, don't ask. If you feel like leaving comments regarding how I went about this, please do so below. And please be kind. The connectors are finally assembled with any soldering atrocities well hidden underneath the cover. The silicone grommets still fit in the little case slot, and with a little bit of tweaking, fit flush and still hold the cable quite well. For future saver builds, I think I'm going to source a cable that is a little bit more flexible and also has 4 wires that are of a smaller gauge, making it easier for me to connect. The cable I'm using here has a 5mm outer diameter, and the grommets happen to have a slightly less than 5mm inner diameter, making a nice snug fit. And seeing as I just bought a whole whack of new grommets with a 5mm inner diameter, I'm going to have to make sure the new cable I find has an appropriate outer diameter so it still fits nice and snug. At this point, probably a good idea to test these plugs. And hopefully my awesome plug connections are working properly and nothing is shorted. All connections are A-OK. And finally, let's get the lid on this thing. Hammond does supply the lid screws for this particular enclosure. 2 self-tappers is all it takes to seal her up. Those grommets still might require some tweaking. The inside edge that I trimmed is still pushing up on the case lid. Anyway, here it is. Looks pretty good. We finally have our completely assembled BWAC C64 Saver version 2.4. For comparison, this is BWAC's original C64 Saver, the streamlined and difficult to assemble model, but our model, a little bit chunkier, is much easier to build, unless you're me trying to solder DIN connectors. Let's do one last test before we call this complete. I'm using a female DIN plug connected to my digital multimeter, and I am only measuring the 5-volt line, so pins 2 and 5 are the ones being measured. The 9-volt AC pins at the top, pins 6 and 7, I'm not going to worry about testing as they pass straight through. The output of the Saver will connect to our little female DIN connector. And to make this more of a real-world experiment, I'm using my known good-ish brick of death to supply the 5 volts into the Saver. The old PSU is plugged in and powered up. Now let's connect it all to our Saver and see what we get on our output. First, we'll plug our Saver into our round DIN connector as if we're plugging it into a C64. And on the input side, we will plug in our live PSU plug. We are seeing a slightly elevated output, 5.155 volts. This is with no load, obviously. So far so good. Next, I want to test the cutoff voltage one more time. I've made these small DIN connector leads. Each lead has a 1.5 millimeter ferrule connector on one side, and the other side has a simple alligator clip. These are old Radio Shack specials I had in my parts bin. The 1.5 millimeter ferrule fits nicely in a female DIN connector slot, so we can plug in our 5-volt and ground to pins 5 and 2 respectively, and the alligator clips I can connect to my bench power supply. This is the ground connection. And this is the plus 5-volt output from my power supply. And a quick double check of everything. The power supply is set to 5 volts. It is connected to the input of the Saver, and the output of the Saver is connected to the multimeter. I will enable the output. The output from the Saver is showing a little over 4.99 volts. That is perfect. That's what we were expecting. And now we will slowly turn up the input voltage and see if the Saver cuts off at 5.47 volts, like it did in our initial testing. And we are approaching the expected cutoff voltage, although there is a little bit of a discrepancy between the output from the power supply and the output from the Saver. There it goes. So at 5.47 volts, as expected, the Saver did kick into action and cut off the voltage. One interesting thing I forgot to mention in part 2 of this video series, I measured the voltage output fall time from the overvoltage point to 0 volts with my oscilloscope. I consistently measured a full voltage drop to 0 volts of about 1 or 1.1 milliseconds. And that includes a very fast initial voltage drop to almost zero. This shows that BWAC's circuit is very efficient at cutting the voltage when the overvoltage threshold is met. Okay, so I guess that's it. Are we done? Maybe we need some kind of an indicator, like an LED, to let us know when it's operating and when it's cut off the voltage. Never the person to leave well enough alone. I have dismantled the saver once again, and I am looking at the 5-volt output and thinking I could easily put an LED and resistor across there. The green LED would be illuminated while the saver is operating normally, meaning it is outputting 5 volts, and the green LED would turn off if the saver ever cut the output because of an overvoltage. Now it's just a matter of placement, and I think I need to drill a 3mm hole, probably in the corner. I have selected a 3mm green LED with a forward voltage of 1.95 volts, and I am pairing that up with a resistor of 330 ohms and a little bit of heat shrink. I am going to connect the LED to the 5-volt output, but from the underside of the PCB, because that's the only viable solder point. And to do that, I need to add some very thin, in this case 30 gauge hookup wire, so I can wrap the LED around the bottom to the top and mount it into the lid. I'm going to add a smidge more of solder to the 2 connections on the underside of the PCB, and then I will solder on my 2 thin hookup wires. And a tad more flux seems to make things happen a lot more easily. Again, not always so easy to manage this with the camera so close to the work area. Okay, that bit is done. I will clean up this flux and then reinstall the PCB back into the case. I've drilled a hole for the LED in the top of the case with a 3mm bit, and now I need to set the LED into the hole and somehow stick it there so it doesn't move. The LED does stick out a bit higher than I like, but that's what we're working with. I've decided I'm going to glue the LED in place. I'll run the wires neatly down the side like this and tape it, and then use my new favorite hobby glue. My new favorite hobby glue is clear Gorilla Glue. It applies really easily. It is crystal clear even when it hardens. And once fully cured, it's as hard as plastic. Once you apply it, it does remain runny for a little while, which allows you to work with it. In this case, I'm going to leave the lid tilted up, and it will actually run and fill all the space around the LED where I've applied it. I will now leave this overnight and come back to it in the morning and see where we're at. It's the next day, and our glue has cured enough to touch, and the LED is locked in place. Finally, we can take off our tape, put the lid back on, and do one last test, and that should be it. And there we have it. LED is installed. It's still a little bit sticky outy for my taste, but this is good for the first one. And yes, we do need to test it one more time. I now have the C64 saver, now with LED, connected to the same test rig, and I'm going to enable the output on the power supply. The saver is outputting just about 5 volts, and yes, our LED indicator is lit, letting us know that the output is normal. Now let's turn up the voltage slowly and wait for the saver to cut off. And our LED has turned off, so when the LED is on, we have good voltage. When the LED is off, we have an overvoltage. And finally, after 3 videos, we have successfully completed the build of a C64 Saver version 2.4 from scratch. Although I hit some bumps in the road, in the end, it turned out really well. I'm quite happy with how it looks, how it's built, and how it performs. The purpose of this video series was to share with you how I went about building a BWAC C64 Saver version 2.4, and I hope I've accomplished that. And I hope that you've been somewhat entertained along the way as well. And once again, not ready to leave well enough alone, I've been contemplating other mods to perform on the C64 Saver, but we'll save that for another video, or video series. But wait, before you go, we have one last thing to attend to, the giveaway of the Commodore cookie cutters. 2 cookie cutters will be given away. One winner will be drawn from the group of people that left a qualifying comment in part 2 of this video series. And the winner of the second cookie cutter will go to one of my Patreon subscribers. And with that, let's draw the winners. Okay, and here we go. I'm using the wheelofnames.com random name selector. It's fun to watch and it's free. I have added the names of all the participants who correctly entered the hashtag Commodore Cookie in their comments. And I'm going to click the wheel and spin for a winner. Round and round she goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. And congratulations to Adrian Bestador. I hope I'm not butchering your name, but congratulations, Adrian. You have won a Commodore cookie cutter. And I will be in touch with you on how to get the cookie cutter to you. And there is a second cookie cutter to give away. This one is going to one of my Patreon subscribers. Again, I have all the names entered on the Wheel of Names. And here we go. Of course, if you would like to become a Patreon subscriber and support this channel, see the link in the description. Nice! The winner is Robin at 8-Bit Show and Tell. Yeah, if you've been living under a rock and don't already know, Robin has an awesome 8-Bit Retro YouTube channel. So if you've got nothing else to do, subscribe. Robin, I'll be in touch soon to get you your cookie cutter. Congrats to the winners. To confirm, this was a completely random draw with a single spin for each name group using the wheelofnames.com website. If you are interested in buying a Commodore logo or other retro computer themed cookie cutter, Josh, the creator and seller of these, has generously provided my viewers with a 25% off coupon code valid until the end of May 2020. See the description below for the code and a link to Josh's online shop. And that's it. The end of part 3 and the end of this video series. I hope that all of you who have stuck with me along the way and who might be considering to build their own C64 Saver have learned a little something here. I am no expert, clearly, so if anyone has any constructive feedback, please feel free to leave a comment below. And please don't forget to like or dislike. As always, thanks to all my viewers, channel subscribers, and of course my Patreon subscribers. If you enjoyed this video series and would like to see more content like this, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. And finally, a huge mega thanks to the one and only Jan Beta for agreeing to take part in some video intro fun. I am honored to say Jan Beta was here. You're the best, JB. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time, everyone. Stay safe out there. Now go wash your hands and don't touch your face.
Uh-oh.